Dr. Kitty, what would you advise a teenager to do when they are living in a drug-using, volatile home environment and are forced to stay home?
I think sometimes these questions are hard to answer because you don't know everything that's going around that child, but obviously if they're 17, they're in a very dangerous environment, in the home environment, is to use whatever supportive resource they have around them, whether that's school, teacher, I know we have peer groups here, but somehow to ask for help because they are not in a safe place and we want to get them to that safe place. But it's a relational based thing, so they have to be able to reach out to somebody of trust. We know that even one healthy adult in the life of a child can help change a trajectory. And so identifying who they trust that could be healthy for them is going to be key to changing what's happening in their life.
Thank you. Dr. Hannah, I don't know if you know this answer or not. How do you test for the DRD2A1 gene? Is that a trick question, or do you know that answer?
No.
Okay. Good enough.
So there are actually a lot of tests now, and you can actually ask your doctor to actually give you a screening, and there are specific screenings that'll actually tell you not only that gene, but there are several other genes that are involved in addiction. So it'll tell you what are your chances of becoming an addict, which I think is actually really good because actually 70% of heroin users started because of overprescription of prescription drugs.
Wow.
So if you know that you already have that genetic predisposition, that might go ahead and tell your physician to, you got to be very careful on how much you prescribe. So there are screenings that you can do that. Yeah.
Perfect. Good answer. Thank you. Dr. Kitty, is there any way to identify maladaptive behavior versus psychopath? I'm going to say this wrong.
Psychopathology.
Thank you.
Yeah. So actually, I'm a big believer that pretty much everything we do has been adaptive. It's our experiences. It's been adaptive to where we've come from. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have psychopathological components to it. So I think, for example, children with trauma, until we had trauma-informed care, most of those children were called attention deficit disorder, or they were called bipolar, called this, called that. When we didn't, and actually, I'll tell you right now, being the medical director at an autism assessment center, it's amazing to me how many children with trauma are being called autistic and not getting trauma-informed care. And so I think what you need to do is study the etiology, the ecology, right? Not just the environment, but their relationship to that environment and what it means to them. And even if it's maladaptive behavior, in our medical world, we call it a pathology, but I think the treatments, the interventions, how we approach it has to be done in a way that's sensitive to what the etiology was. So I know I kind of wavered a little bit on that question because I think depending on your discipline, you're going to see them overlap a lot. But I think it's really important to understand where things come from, not to excuse it, but to provide the right intervention for it.
Good, thank you. We have one that keeps going back and forth, so we're going to guess on this one, make sure I do it right. Any advice, Dr. Hannah, on how to prevent against the lower dopamine levels when an addict is triggered?
So when an addict is triggered, that's actually a tough one.
Yeah.
Because that's something that is beyond your conscious level. That is something that is, it's the same thing as to say, how do I go ahead and not get my heart to race when, I see a bear at me? It's gonna happen. There are actually, there's a relatively new technique that I just saw being used, where they can actually train a person. They'll actually show them drug paraphernalia, and they'll actually measure and see when they actually have enough of that stop pathway that's in your brain that goes ahead and has some of the inhibitory ones, when it's active enough. And so they were actually trying, it's in clinical trials, to see if that can be used to go ahead and help train your brain to start getting that back. But it's it's hard unless you actually have feedback from a system that'll tell you where you're at.
So like an active neurofeedback kind of process. Got it. Dr. Kitty, do you think it is safe for a child in foster care to go back to a parent with a history of drug use? Which is a loaded question. I can see that one coming.
Yes, it is a loaded question. So to me, the history is not the question.
Sure.
So because, because since most of the children in care come from homes where drugs is a problem, we're going to face that with almost all of the children, at least 80 to 85% of the children. So I don't have an issue that there was a drug problem. I have an issue in terms of have the parents or caregivers, can they provide a safe environment? Have they gone through treatment? People who do drug treatment can see, is this parent just following some motions, or are they actually engaged in this treatment? Do they accept some responsibility for what happened? Where are we in this? And are they committed to making this a different home for their child? Unfortunately, I don't get to meet as many of those. The ones that I meet are the ones, that are more like saying, I have a right to this child because I birthed this child, so it's mine. And I can do what I want to this child because it is mine. Those, to me, that's more the issue. So for me, the history of drug use is not so much the question as it is this parent able to provide that nurturing and safe environment, and how is it that we can support that and watch that it's maintained?
Thank you. And Dr. Hanna, we have about 15 seconds left. One last question for you. It's about the DRD2A1. Again, is it responsible for depression?
It can be, yes, along with other ones. So there's usually never just one gene that's responsible or one, but it plays a role in depression. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank both our panelists for being here. Let's give them a round of applause for their contribution.